Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast, This Week in America, online, thisweekinamerica.us. New from author John McKoy, Son of the Maya, an international adventure set in Washington, Miami, and the jungles of Guatemala between 2006 and 2009. The drama involves an international kidnapping, a daring rescue, a powerful revolutionary force, injustice, and social change. John Skip McKoy has traveled extensively in Central America, Africa, Asia, and Europe. Fluent in Spanish, he worked for 2 years as a community organizer in Guatemala. John has led public, private, and nonprofit organizations in the U.S. John Skip McKoy, author of the international thriller Son of the Maya, with us on This Week in America. John, welcome to the program. It's great to have you with us.
Well, thank you. I appreciate you having me on.
This is an interesting story. One review said I started reading it and I couldn't put it down. I literally had to finish the book. We'll talk about the book during the program today, but this is a great idea, and I read your background. How much of this story came from your background, spending time in Guatemala and following the political goings-on there?
Well, a lot of what you see in the book that takes place in Guatemala obviously came from my 2-year experience as a volunteer in Guatemala City. But hopefully it's updated. That was 50 years ago, and I've been back once. And it's only the anchor for the book. It's the rest of it's really fictitious.
Well, that's interesting because you have that vision. You were there. You've got an idea as to the location, the people. How do you come up with the story? Because it takes a twist and turns. It's a evolving story as it goes on. How did you develop the story? Where did this idea come from?
The idea for the story, I sort of did it in the reverse logic of what a lot of authors do. I had a few points that I wanted to make. I wanted to make sure that I conveyed my sense of appreciation, excitement, interest in Latin America. I wanted to make sure that I presented characters that I thought were sort of everyday American characters. They just happened to have been immigrants. And I thought, given what's going on today, that might be an interesting theme for people. And then after I got the setting, I spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., so part of it was going to be in the Latino community here, where I've spent a lot of time working in the last 20 years. Once I had the settings, then I started thinking, okay, what's a great story? And I started thinking about some of the things that had happened to me in Guatemala, and there are a couple of small scenes in there that are reflective of the things that actually happened to me. I wasn't kidnapped, and it just came together, started coming together when I think of little things that I thought would be interesting and captivating to people.
John McKoy is our guest on the program. The book we're talking about is his new novel, The Son of the Maya. John McKoy, information available, of course, at Amazon. You'll find the book there, bookventure.com in the bookstore. And John's website, which is mckoysbooks.com. That's MCKOYS, mckoysbooks.com. And you can link on directly by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. I want to talk about the main characters in the book. Roberto Prettyman, it starts off with him getting a phone call. His nephew is in the hospital. Roberto's going through a transition in his life as well. He gets this phone call, which basically changed the course of his life as well. Give me a little background on him and his nephew and how the nephew ended up in the hospital.
Roberto's when you meet him, he's just about finishing completing his retirement. He was a real estate executive. He sold his company, his mid-50s, and he wants to figure out what he wants to do with the rest of his life. His nephew is staying with him part-time, as he's coming up here from Guatemala and attending American University in the district. So he's in and out of Roberto's condo. The call, without getting into details, comes from the hospital. He's been injured, and they think it might have been gang-related, and that's the beginning of the ins and outs and the twists around activity in Columbia Heights, which is a Latino community in the district. Yes.
I was just saying, Roberto is a really interesting character. He is this very successful businessman, successful real estate company, and he decides to shift into philanthropy. He's got this foundation that he's working on in Guatemala. And talk about that, because this was really, you would think this is sort of benign. He's going in, he is going to help. This actually was not taken well by some of the forces in Guatemala.
Yeah, no, the foundation has a Guatemalan name, but it's actually in D.C.
Yes.
And he's working. What he would like to do is help Latino youth who are either unemployed, out of school, or barely in school, give them some skills so they become job ready. And that's his basic theme. And as a real estate developer, he'd been disappointed that he couldn't get more young people involved in the business. So that's what he wants to do, but he doesn't want to do the hands-on training. He's the philanthropist who's going to give money to organizations that are doing the training. And the conflict comes up in Guatemala is in this neighborhood, he's found a good organization to fund, to do training of young people in job skills related to construction, and he becomes very successful. This organization becomes successful, and he helps guide it. The problem is it's also a neighborhood that has a drug trade. And as the book gets into, the impetus for the drug trade, the kingpin, so to speak, is in Guatemala. And there lies the conflict. The same kids that are now getting off the street and constructively getting involved in construction are kids who were targets for the drug trade. So Roberto, our hero, is helping these kids, but he's obviously hurting the drug trade, which is centered in Guatemala, and that's the basic conflict.
And the leader of that is Felix Gigante. Talk about him. He is the Guatemalan rebel leader. And he gets involved in this because this is really this philanthropy effort that Roberto's undergoing is costing him money.
It is costing him money, and it is a conflict between these two guys. Both are Guatemalan. Roberto was born in Guatemala, but he's basically raised in the United States. Felix was born in Guatemala and chose to stay there. He was a law student. There's an incident that turned his life around and turned him from a student and somebody who would have been in the middle class. Maybe he would have emigrated to the United States. However, something happened in his life and he decided to become a guerrilla, basically a revolutionary. So the guy is super smart. He lives in the jungles of Guatemala and he patterns his revolution after Fidel Castro. And therefore, where his revolution is financed in part by this drug trade, it comes all the way up into North America and to Washington, D.C.
The book we're talking about is Son of the Maya. John McKoy, McKoy, is the author. The book's available at Amazon, bookventure.com, the publisher, and at John's website, mckoysbooks.com, McKoys, mckoysbooks.com. Look on our website, thisweekinamerica.us, and get information there. I mentioned the characters. As I'm reading the book, you really bring these characters to life. Talk about, you provide backstories that make sense. Everybody is all connected. Talk about, as an author, what you go through in establishing characters that we can relate to. And I guess the first step in relating is being able to understand these people. You give us a rich background, a rich history on these characters.
Well, some of them obviously come to mind because they remind me of people that I have known. Some of them are totally fictitious, and as I get into the story, as the theme evolves and the tension in the book begins to develop, as you've heard many authors say, the characters take off. I mean, it's just I'm sitting there and and a little bird on this shoulder says, well, you want to have this person do this. Another bird on this shoulder says, no, that's stupid. They're never going to do that. And you write it out, and you sit back and look at it and say, the stupid bird wins. That's not what that person would do. Skip McKoy might do that, but that character is not going to do that. And so it's just a back and forth, and it's almost like a movie playing out in your head. I may have some central characteristics of each character. You know, are they honest? Are they loyal? Are they articulate? Are they well educated? Are they tough? Are they dependable? And then you put them in situations, and they sort of play out their characteristics for you and develop for you. And as you review, you see that it hangs together or it doesn't hang together, and that's when you do your 1,000 edits.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I guess is the benefit of it drafted. You can go back and look at and sort of see if it makes as much sense as you're reading it later as it did as you were sitting writing it. Besides the characters and the themes, the topics that we talked about, you take us on twists and turns. Just when we think we have a pretty good idea what's going to happen, suddenly it goes in a different direction. Talk about that, because that's a very important element. Once you get everything else together, you've got to hold our interest and keep us wanting to turn the page and to not put the book down and finish it tomorrow.
Yeah, well, by and large, I do a draft outline in the beginning. So I know in general where I want the story to conclude, and frankly, that often changes by the time I get to the end of the story. But for me, I have to have that in mind so that you don't sort of drift off and have this interesting episode with a character, and then leave it and it never goes anywhere in the book, which I have done in early drafts. So you keep in mind where you're going with the book, and as interesting episodes, interaction occurs, like there's an interaction on the street in Guatemala, which reflects something that actually happened to me. And there was another one on a soccer field in Guatemala, where I'm inventing characters to sort of portray this episode, and the episode is fictionalized, so it's not literally like what happened to me. And then I sit back and say, well, that's really interesting, Skip, and you had a good time working with that, but it has nothing to do with the book. So you have to can that. But sometimes it does, and I can tie it back in so that something in that event has meaning to the reader later in the book. But it's a lot of trial and error.
You take on some social issues, and this, I believe, although not set in 2018, is relevant today. A lot of what you talk about is very pertinent as we deal with some of these issues today. Talk about that in getting into not only entertaining us, but giving us, because as we go through this, we get to thinking a little bit as we're reading and enjoying the book.
Well, as you mentioned in the introduction, it takes place in basically between 2007, 2009, 10. And if you reflect back on what was happening in that period in this country, I mean, we had Katrina. We had the Elian Gonzalez, the Cuban refugee kid who got bounced back and forth between Miami and Cuba. These were the things that were affecting the U.S. and on people's minds. So there was a lot to do with immigration, a lot to do with what was happening in the southern part of our country. And obviously, we still have those themes. We still have disasters. And so I tried to see if I could pick up on some of those themes. I mean, this is obviously about immigrants. It's obviously about immigrants who have come here legally and have different lives. There's a Cuban community, which I talk about here. There's a small Puerto Rican community in New York that's talked about. There's a Central American community in D.C. and around D.C. So I'm not trying to characterize in fiction everything about these communities. One couldn't do that. But it's to give a flavor of some of the things that people are talking about, but from a totally different perspective. I mean, in this book, you're not worried about whether somebody is a DACA legitimate dreamer or not. That issue hadn't been crystallized yet. But there is some tension. Do you go back? Raul, who's the young kid who you meet early on in the hospital, does he go back to Guatemala? What's he going to do if he does go back? Does he stay in this country? So there's some of the current themes that you can't avoid that I think are pertinent to what we're struggling with today.
John McKoy with us on This Week in America. Son of the Maya is the name of the new book. It's available at Amazon, Book Venture, John's website, mckoysbooks.com. You can link on by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. A couple minutes left in the program. Who were some of your influencers as you were deciding, I would like to write books? As a child, did you read a lot? Was this something you've always wanted to do?
You know, it's funny because as a child, I didn't read a lot. And the reason was my parents kept insisting that I read a lot, so naturally I went the other way.
That's right. Got to rebel at that age.
I played sports. I was in theater. I, did everything else. But I got embarrassed. I didn't listen to them until one time in school I got embarrassed by a principal who basically said, you better knuckle down and start reading. And over the time, as I went to college and so forth, really started to love to read. And then my mom, when she was 60 or so, started taking writing lessons. And I would read some of her stuff and critique it. And she encouraged me to get involved in writing classes. This is outside of work.
Yes.
And I think that was the beginning. Also, back in college, I had our freshman year, we had to take a speech course. And I'll never forget, I delivered one speech. I spent a lot of time writing it. And the speech professor said, I'm going to give you a middle grade on this because it's so good. I want to make sure that you make this part of your life, writing and developing ideas. And I don't want you to slide on this. So I'd say those two things, my mom and then this teacher. And then just, reading a lot after I got through my fascination with athletics. And I've always enjoyed reading after that.
Well, I'm glad you finally listened to Mom. See, she does know what she's talking about. It took a few years, but you listened to Mom, and it's paid off. I know this is your second novel. What Paying to Play in Hong Kong was novel number one. That's information available at mckoysbooks.com. What are you working on now? You got something else you're ready to print, maybe?
No. I have something that I'm in the beginning. I have the beginning stages of a completed draft, a book that takes place in Honolulu and Washington, D.C., and a little bit in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. But it's, as you can tell, it's got the international flavor to it.
Yes.
But it's very contemporary, and it's focused on a father and two sons helping to try and foil a terror attack here in the United States.
Well, I am looking forward to reading that. Enjoyed Son of the Maya. One of the reviews, methodically placed thriller strengthened by resourceful characters. I would back that up. It is an excellent read. It will be difficult once you start to put it down. It takes a lot of twists and turns. It's a very enjoyable book. The book is available at Amazon, of course, at bookventure.com, in the bookstore there. That's the publisher, and at John's website, which is mckoysbooks.com, MCKOYS, mckoysbooks.com. John, a pleasure having you with us on the program. Love having a chance to read the book. It's a great story. You are a very talented writer. I look forward to the next book, and hopefully we'll have a chance to talk about that as well.
I appreciate it, Rick. Thank you very much. I enjoy listening to your show and really appreciate you having me on. Thank you.
Thank you. It has been our pleasure. Son of the Maya is once again the name of the book. John McKoy, MCKOY, is the author. The book's available at Amazon, Barnes & Noble, and at John's website, mckoysbooks.com. And, of course, you can link on directly to John's website by going to our website, thisweekinamerica.us. And we're back right after these messages.